WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington. With over 350 restaurants to choose from, Bloomington, Indiana is truly a food lover's paradise. Go to visitbloomington.com to discover what suits your taste.
Are you interested in reaching the WFYI audience while supporting the programming you love? Become a sponsor today. Learn more at wfyi.org/sponsor.
We're going to take a trip right now. Like we always do about this time.
This is a journey into sound.
Break it down.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. Up first, on this week's show, I'll speak with the Indianapolis composer, performer, and multimedia artist, Jordan Munson. He has a new album out, titled Heartless Fools. The album was recorded at Greenhouse Studios in Iceland and features contributions from Indianapolis musicians, including Hanna Benn and Charlie Ballantine. The music on Heartless Fools is a response to the complex social and political landscape of present-day America. The album features a constantly shifting sonic palette, exploring elements of jazz, classical music, R&B, and electronic sounds.
I don't write things to necessarily be political. It's just more about something that can't be expressed any other way other than music. There's a lot of hopefully a lot of moments of beauty that are just offset by violence and aggression and tension.
And on the second half of the broadcast, I'll be joined by music journalist Katherine Yeske Taylor, the author of a new book titled She's a Badass, Women in Rock Shaping Feminism. Tomorrow, Bookstore will present an author talk with Katherine on February 20th at the Indy Fringe Theatre.
I think progress is being made, and I think when things do come up, women feel much more empowered to actually speak up about it and know that they're going to receive support.
Jordan Munson will join me in a moment, but first, we'll hear two tracks from his new album, Heartless Fools. We'll listen to My Heart, followed by Christmas, 1914.
This is my heart. I will get on. Here I come.
That was the Indianapolis-based composer, performer, and multimedia artist, Jordan Munson, with Christmas 1914. And Jordan Munson is my guest this week. Let's join our conversation. Jordan, thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
You have a brilliant new album out, Heartless Fools. We're going to explore that album at length. Before we get started, I want to ask you about the label you worked with on this project. Heartless Fools was released by Church of Noise, which is a nonprofit offshoot of the Indianapolis label Joyful Noise Recordings. This was the first release from Church of Noise as well.
Yes.
Tell us about your work with this label and anything you want to share about Church of Noise.
Yeah. To start, I'm so fortunate and so happy to be the first, release from this new sub-label from Joyful Noise. From my understanding, it was an organization that was there to support, these kind of more experimental projects that, in these days, it's hard to to get a lot of support for those things. And so I think this is a great, extension, and I know they're going to do a lot more. So it seemed like the perfect home for the type of music that I make. And I sort of waited and waited and waited on this material and sharing with lots of people, and eventually through some channels found a good home here, and like a nice physical release. And I really appreciate it. And also, I know that behind that is a whole collection of Church of Noise elders just sort of listening to those things. And so that makes me feel good too. It's a bunch of people that I really respect. And so to have them interested to release my music, it feels really good.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit, and their board of advisors are referred to as the church elders.
Yes, yeah.
And this is like an all-star group of indie music pioneers and legends. So yeah, so they gave you the thumbs up on this project and lent their support to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, I could have just stopped there, because I think like Greg Saunier from Deerhoof,
yeah.
So that's enough for me. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. There are many local and global elements to this record. You feature many Indianapolis musicians on this project: Hanna Benn, Charlie Ballantine, Dylan Hostetter, Jesse Whitman. You also feature musicians from outside Indianapolis. Part of the record, from what I understand, was recorded in Indianapolis, and part of it was recorded in Iceland at a very legendary music studio there. Tell us about the recording of this album, particularly your work in Iceland.
Yeah, so how this actually started was back in 2017, 2018, I had a Creative Renewals Fellowship through the Arts Council of Indianapolis. And the idea was that I would go to Iceland to this studio, Greenhouse Studios, and kind of be in residency and have a lot of time to work on some new ideas and kind of marinate on things I've been developing. And kind of how that got set up is a year prior, my wife and I went to Iceland, and through a composer, a friend of mine, Nico Muley, went to the studio. And this is a studio where the record label Bedroom Community is based out of. Composers I really enjoy, Valgeir Sigurdsson and Nico and Ben Frost and all that. And I was just instantly fell in love with the space, because it was like a very creative spot, architecturally beautiful. You could stay there when you're there. And a lot of music that I listened to was recorded there, work from Björk and Sigur Rós and Feist and all this. So I knew I wanted to be there. And so that was kind of the setup. But then, I went there in, I believe it was January of 2018. Is that right? Yeah, and then some things I had ahead of time, some ideas, and wanted to experiment with things. But then other things came out just from being there. The second track on this album, Christmas 1914, is just, it happened in like 2 hours, and just using the materials that were there and working with brilliant recording engineer Francesco Fabrice. He's always been very accomplished, but since then he's worked on, things like the score for that Dark in 1899 on Netflix and other things, and he's a really good electronic musician. So we had a lot of collaboration going on, working with some modular synth things that he had, and so actually that was one of my biggest collaborators there, day in and day out. And then working with this amazing Icelandic cellist, Þórdís, and she's all over the record. Yeah, and then after that, a lot of the Indianapolis collaborations came sort of after that, kind of responding to what I captured there.
I'm curious about your initial attraction to Iceland. Was it rooted in music? I grew up with the music of Björk, which gave Iceland this very kind of mystic aura, and you wanted to learn more about the music there, and there is a rich scene there. What was your initial attraction to Iceland?
That was it. Similarly, like Björk is a huge influence of mine, always has been. And then, of course, like what I mentioned before, Sigur Rós. So to be in the space where some of the things that, we listened to growing up happened, I was curious, like how does that affect the work, And it's funny, like, I'd find some sounds while I was there, like, oh, that's the same sound. That's the exact same sound from this recording. So that was, I guess I just wanted to fan out a little bit, and that was really attractive to be there.
The music on Heartless Fools is powerful, and there's a wide spectrum of sounds and atmospheres throughout the album, but it struck me that there's a recurring sense of tension and unease expressed in this music. And from what I understand, that's part of the thematic concept of the album, and I want to ask you about that. And I even want to read an excerpt, if it's okay, from the notes accompanying the release. While the music itself is not intended to be political, the title, Heartless Fools, refers to the response of two characters to the current political landscape. And I'll just cut it off there. You get in more depth as it goes on. But tell us about that statement and the themes you're exploring on this album.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was exploring a lot of the things that have been going on since then, unfortunately. You know, the divide among us here, and I kind of had these two characters in my mind, and it's kind of, you know, based on my own perception and opinions, and, you know, people around me that for, you know, a certain amount of time since then, actually a little more so since around, you know, 2018 to 2022 or something, just this like low lingering depression and resigning to this kind of sorrow, like, you know, regretting what we've lost and all that. And then a group of people that just seem to want to burn the world down, and that divide. And I don't know, I felt like I wanted to explore that tension in the music. And sometimes it happens within a single track. There's a lot of like, hopefully a lot of moments of beauty that are just offset by violence and aggression and tension. It happens between tracks as well, you know, and that was really a challenge to express musically. And like I said in the statement, I don't write things to necessarily be political. It's just more about something that can't be expressed any other way other than music. So to me, the challenge was, to try to do that, but also to create an album that, as you listen to it all the way through, it does abstractly feel like it's telling a story in some way, and it does feel cohesive as a whole once you get to the end of it. Hopefully you're rewarded in the end, and it feels like it all makes sense.
Up next, I want to share the album's title track, which features vocalists Isaiah Robinson and Indianapolis's hero, Hanna Benn. Anything you want to share about this track before we listen? It's an incredible piece of music.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that one's a whirlwind. And it goes to show sometimes the things that you're the least interested in, or the things that aren't working, become some of the best material, because what it started out with, it was like a landscape of music box, like kind of a soundscape of music box layers controlled by machine learning. And that's a whole other thing to unpack. And then in Iceland, we did some experimental things that took on a little more shape, but it was still, I would say it was still like an avant-garde electronic music track. And so through years of iteration, it becomes this, I don't know, alt R&B neo-soul thing. And Isaiah Robinson, this was the first thing I actually worked on with him. It just so happens to come out years later, and I worked on a track with him again for a Sunlux remix, and he's just incredible. And of course, I couldn't not work with Hanna because we're longtime friends and collaborators. But I think their voices together sound incredible.
Yeah. Let's listen to that track now. This is Jordan Munson with Heartless Fools. That was Jordan Munson with the title track from his new album, Heartless Fools, out now through Church of Noise. And Jordan, you're always involved in a lot of really interesting projects. An article was published last year through the Indianapolis Business Journal titled Experimental Musician Uses AI as Collaborator. Tell us about the work of artificial intelligence or machine learning tools in your creative process.
Well, that's a good way to pose it, because if we were going to talk about it for all the arts, we'd be here all day.
Yeah, right.
But for me, I've been using it for a number of years. And actually, to back up to that Heartless Fools, the original material came from this installation project I had through the House Life Project. Basically, it was my first kind of step into using AI in music. And in that instance, the machine learning would listen to musical gestures that came in, through an input, and it would identify categories of things and say oh, that sounds like something I've heard before. And it would kind of force it to move in certain directions. And I found that really fascinating, because it felt like a more organic, like a relationship with another musician. And since then, I've done a number of different things with AI and machine learning. And that was years ago. Now it's such a hot topic, and I've been fascinated since then. I had a former colleague that wrote a bunch of things for, neural network, machine learning, and music, back in those days, 2017, 2018. But for me, it's always been something that seems pretty natural, because I make a lot of really iterative art, especially in music and video art. It's a layer, and then that goes through the wash, and another layer, and then I go until it's too far, and I step back. And so that's kind of how I find myself attracted to AI processes too, is to use it as just another tool. And sometimes it's good as an initial prompt. Sometimes it's good to kind of throw a wrench in things. I don't worry about it a lot, and I talk about this a lot these days with students when we're talking about futures, music technology, and the arts. The thing I always think about, or the comparison I make is, if I owned Kurt Cobain's guitar, the exact guitar, I'm not going to sound like Kurt Cobain when I play that guitar, right? It's a tool. And so AI or any kind of anything that's coming out of this for the arts or anything, it's just another tool, and it's up to the creative or the artist to, it's a lot of iteration, so it's up to us to decide when to stop. You could stop at the first run through, but it's probably going to be not very good. And then how much of that to use, and it's best, I find, when it's a collaboration where you get something back and you change it and you give it back, and then you get it back and you change it again, and then it's not just a machine, it's a relationship between you and the AI.
And Jordan, I mentioned this earlier, you do incorporate a significant amount of Indianapolis musicians on this record. Tell us about who's playing on this record and some of the Indianapolis musicians you feature. I
have to think back to this time, but this is around the time that I was starting to piece together, I don't need to separate out these different parts of my creative life. Like, I have a background in jazz and improvisation. I have a background in pop music, playing in rock bands and making my own music, and then kind of the avant-garde academic electronic music stuff. So I wanted to collaborate as much as possible to engage with people across all those genres. I don't even want to say genres, but all backgrounds. And then it just made sense to engage with the people that I was inspired by, and a lot of them are from here. And so much talent from this city. It's always like an overlooked gem, especially in certain areas, like you mentioned Hanna Benn. I mean, in my mind, no one's making music at all. But, if we look at the world of like orchestral music, but also things that she's doing with her own solo music, no one's making anything like that. And I'm not just saying in Indianapolis, just at all. So, of course, I wanted to feature that. And then Charlie Ballantine, everyone listening to this knows who he is, and just wanted to touch in with those people and also kind of challenge them, I guess, because the music I was asking them to play on wasn't what they would typically choose to be involved with. They just happened to be friends, and we had mutual admiration. So yeah, this Charlie Ballantine playing guitar on a few tracks, and on one track on this album, and Jesse Whitman, the bass player. But kind of my like secret weapon has always been the saxophonist Alan Tyson. There's even more music that we've worked on together, and back when he lived in Indianapolis, so he was Indianapolis-based, we played shows together, which helped develop tracks on this album like Attack and Collapse were kind of in conversation with him. And interestingly, he was a former student of mine at IUPUI, now IU Indianapolis.
I did want to ask you about Dylan Hofstetter, and the final track I have prepared to play is Slowed Over. Tell me about Dylan's contribution to this album.
Dylan is just a brilliant vocalist. Hanna and him have known each other for a long time. Their families have, and coming from that kind of church choir background, he went to, I believe he went to IU, and this is another one. Interestingly, there's some kind of computer human iteration in there with the text and kind of a back and forth with some very early versions of, this is pre-ChatGPT, but early versions of like prompting and doing kind of William Burroughs cut-up method and finding different things. And so, yeah, I really, again, wanted like this particular type of voice, and I knew that it matched Dylan's range. We had known each other for a while. And he was game to jump in on it, and I had an idea in my mind of what the vocals could sound like, and then he just went way above that. And I find it to be really soulful and moving, and I didn't expect it to turn out that way, and it's 100% because of Dylan.
Before we listen, are there any future plans or final thoughts you want to share, Jordan?
Oh, future plans. Well, yeah, with this coming out, I feel now like I have more momentum around other projects and some performances and things like that. So looking to play some of this work live and then kind of just push down this direction a little more.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what you have next. I love all the projects you put out. This is an incredible album. Thank you again for being here to discuss it. And we're going to end with the track Slowed Over from the album Heartless Fools. Thank you, Jordan.
Our voice is not our own. Nothing is and nothing is. And when you feel it all pulled apart, be reminded it's the pieces I love.
Cultural Manifesto will return after this short break.
Are you interested in reaching the WFYI audience while supporting the programming you love? Become a sponsor today. Learn more at wfyi.org/sponsor.
I'm Kyle Long, and you're listening to Cultural Manifesto. Up next, I'll speak with music journalist Katherine Yeske Taylor, the author of a new book titled She's a Badass: Women in Rock Shaping Feminism. Tomorrow Bookstore will present an author talk with Katherine on February 20th at the Indy Fringe Theatre. The conversation will be moderated by the Indianapolis bass player Nicole O'Neill of Wife Patrol. She's a Badass features Katherine's interviews with 20 influential women in rock music, including Ann Wilson of Heart, Gina Schock of the Go-Go's, Exene Cervenka of X, Amy Ray of the Indigo Girls, Suzanna Vega, Lydia Lunch, and others. Let's join my conversation with Katherine Yeske Taylor. Katherine, thank you so much for being here to talk about your new book, She's a Badass, Women in Rock Shaping Feminism.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really enjoyed reading this book, and I loved the theme and concept too. My first introduction to feminism came about through listening to some of the musicians you featured in your book.
Cool.
And I want to mention my little sister who had a huge influence on me. She took me to my first punk rock concert, which was an L7 show.
Excellent.
Yeah. It was at Bogart's in Cincinnati. L7 is an important punk band founded in Los Angeles around 1989. From what I understand, your interview with L7 singer and guitarist Danita Sparks was in many ways the launch pad for this book. As we get started, tell me about your interview with Danita and how that led to the creation of this book, She's a Badass.
I had interviewed Danita when we were kind of at peak pandemic time, and she was doing a bunch of things online to try to connect with fans in the absence of shows. And I think the article came out pretty well. It was run in an online magazine called The Big Takeover, who I contribute to a lot. And an agent saw it, a literary agent saw it, and thought it was good and got in touch with me and said, I liked that article, so I looked at more of your work, and you seem like you'd be a really good author. Have you ever considered writing a book? And as we got to talking, he mentioned, you seem to have a real handle on what's going on with women in rock, so why don't you write a book about women and feminism in the music business? And as soon as he said that, I knew it was going to be the perfect topic for me. I knew there was definitely going to be enough interest and material out there for me to put in a whole book.
At that point, had the subject of feminism been a thread in your prior work?
No, not deliberately. But I mean, every time I interviewed a female artist, I think there's a certain bond because, we share that experience of being women in the music business. And I think that it probably encouraged people to tell me stories in a way that they might not if I were a man. I think there's a certain level of trust there that we've probably been through some of the same kinds of things.
And Katherine, the book features interviews with 20 prominent rock musicians. These are presented roughly in chronological order, beginning with some of the legendary pioneers like Ann Wilson of Heart and Cherie Currie of the Runaways. And then you move on into the punk movement and so on and so forth into the present day. You start the book with Suzi Quatro. She's not really a household name here in the United States, but she did have a profound influence on rock music. Tell us about Suzi Quatro and why you opened the book with her story.
Okay, well, Suzi is one of the first people I asked to do this book because I feel like she's such an important figure in the music business. And you're right, unfortunately, here in America, she doesn't have as high a profile as she does in the rest of the world. She's very popular across Europe and Australia. She routinely sells out places like Royal Albert Hall in London. But she's originally from Detroit, and she began her music career when she was a teenager playing in a band called the Pleasure Seekers with her sisters. And then she struck out on her own. She had some hits with songs such as 45 Crash, and was taken on as the opening act for Alice Cooper for his Welcome to My Nightmare tour in the mid-'70s. And then after that, she became really popular across Europe and Australia, and only had a couple of minor hits here in America, unfortunately. She had a song called Stumbling In that people might remember, but I think most Americans will probably recognize her from her role starring as Leather Tuscadero on Happy Days. Anyway, I just thought she's one of those musicians who other musicians cite as an influence a lot. So even though I think casual fans might not be as familiar with her, I knew that she was really important in terms of being an influence on other musicians. And as you read this book, you will see that other people in it do credit her as inspiring them, because she was really, by many ways of looking at it, the very first female rock star. She played her own instruments. She wrote her own songs. She led her own band. these are things that really hadn't been done the way she did before her. I mean, there were artists such as Janis Joplin and Grace Slick, of course, but, they were parts of bands or other people wrote their songs for them. So Susie really was a trailblazer, and so that's why I felt like she was the perfect person to open this book and hopefully get more people to check out some of the music that she's made.
And Katherine, your book, She's a Badass, does focus exclusively on rock musicians. In a prior interview, I heard you say this was a very intentional choice, as you see the gender imbalance in rock music being more prominent than in genres like hip-hop, pop, R&B, or country music. Tell me about that decision to focus exclusively on rock music.
Well, in my music journalism career, I interview people from across all different genres. I quite often will interview country artists and pop artists. But I've just noticed that when I'm covering rock music, that I don't interview as many women. And it just kind of struck me that there's still quite a bit of imbalance when you listen to radio stations or you look online and you look up the current crop of rock artists. There are some really great up-and-coming female rock artists, but it still seems like the balance is still off in this genre. And I guess it's my personal theory that, rock music has always been so testosterone-driven that perhaps that's the reason behind it. But some of the women in my book do talk about how when they were starting off their careers, as recently as some of the women who started in the 90s, there were rock DJs that flat out refused to play female artists at all, or had a female quota, as they called it. They only played a certain number of female artists, which is crazy that was still the case so recently. And I think that artificially really suppressed women in rock, and that continues to reverberate today.
And Katherine, one of my favorite chapters in the book was your piece on Toby Vale, the drummer of Bikini Kill. Mm-hmm. Bikini Kill were really the face of the Riot Grrrl movement in the 1990s. I again want to mention and give props to my little sister. She was obsessed with the Riot Grrrl movement, and the music was constantly playing in our house, and we went out to see bands like Bikini Kill and Huggy Bear at local DIY venues. Being exposed to this music and culture as a teenager, it radically transformed my values and shaped my understanding of feminism. And I think when we talk about the ways women in rock shaped feminism, Bikini Kill are certainly a big part of that conversation. Tell me about the significance of Bikini Kill and the chapter you devoted to Toby Vale.
Yeah, well, Bikini Kill really, as Toby Vale points out in her chapter, they never really intended to spearhead a feminist movement at all. And in fact, in her mind, it was kind of separate from the music. She was doing a fanzine kind of thing on her own. And then she also was in the band, and she kind of viewed them as two different things. She didn't realize that it was going to be conjoined in the media as one thing, the band that's leading this feminist revolution. But that's how it turned out in the end, whether the band views it that way or not. And I think that it had such a big impact because with Bikini Kill and Huggy Bear and Babes in Toyland and all these other kind of bands that came up at the same time, there was this sense of anger that was being vocalized for the first time, really. It's the first time in music history where women were really showing how upset they were and being defiantly so. I think up until that point, women were really encouraged to kind of suppress their anger, to be agreeable. It was held as a virtue that women should always turn the other cheek kind of thing. And now with Bikini Kill, it was a bunch of women who are standing up and saying, no, there's a lot of things that are happening to us that are unfair or sometimes really scary, violence and things like that. And we have every right to be angry about it and to express that anger. And so I was really glad to get Toby Vale as one of the women for this book because, Kathleen Hanna, who is the lead singer for Bikini Kill, has kind of been looked to as a spokesperson for the Riot Girl movement. And I think Toby, to a large degree, has been kind of overlooked. So I really wanted to get her perspective because she really has a fascinating history. As she talks about in this chapter, she was in a band with Kurt Cobain pre-Nirvana, and the two of them viewed each other as equals in that band. And she takes offense when people try to paint her as some kind of, oh, you were just the girlfriend or you were just the muse kind of thing. And it's another case where she feels that women have been discriminated against, not being given their due credit. So I really thought that it was important to include her in this book, not only for her perspective on the Riot Girl movement, but also because I wanted her to speak to things like getting credit where it's due in the music business, which I think has not always been the case for all women.
Katherine, the musicians you interviewed for this book spoke openly and frankly about the struggles they faced as women in the music industry. From my observations, the culture of music journalism is not terribly different. I'm curious about your experiences as a journalist, but first, I want to ask about an incident from last year that received a lot of attention. In 2023, Jan Winter published an anthology of interviews with rock musicians titled The Masters. Jan is the founder of Rolling Stone magazine and the co-founder of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. During an interview with the New York Times, Jan was asked why his book didn't feature interviews with women or Black musicians, and he said those musicians weren't articulate enough on an intellectual level. His comment sparked a backlash online, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this.
Oh, yeah. When that happened, I wasn't surprised. As a music journalist, I've been aware of people in the music publishing industry with his kind of attitude since I started. I write in the introduction of my book about how when I was starting out, there was a certain male writer who just was not going to let me in the club. He would come up to me and say things like, do you even write your own articles? Be very disparaging. So I was very aware that there were other writers, editors, publishers who had this kind of opinion. So I wasn't surprised at all when this came out. Disappointed, certainly. And also, I have to say, a little sad that it came out too late for me to include it in my book. My book was already well into production at that point, and it was too late to go back and make any kind of major changes. But that's the kind of story that certainly would have had a place in my book, and I would have asked the woman about it. Although, there's a similar type of story to it in Tanya Donnelly's chapter. Tanya Donnelly was the co-founder of several very influential bands, alternative rock bands, including Throwing Muses and The Breeders and Belly. So she certainly is very accomplished. And she talks in her chapter about how she was given a cover story in a magazine. And when she went to do the photo shoot for it, the publisher showed up and asked if she would go to dinner with him. And she said yes, thinking that he wanted to talk about the cover story. So she brought her manager, and a couple of other people that she worked with, thinking that it was more like a business meeting. But when she showed up, he clearly had thought that he was asking her out on a date and was very unhappy that she was turning down his romantic advances. And he killed the cover story. And, she talks about how that made her feel and how she just couldn't believe that someone would do that. And I think that really speaks to the way that certain people in positions of power have always viewed women in this business as more something for their own pleasure or ornamental or just not as highly regarded as their male peers. And so this is a very long-winded answer, but that whole incident with Jan Wenner really opened a can of worms. And I think that it's good because it really got people talking about how things really are in this business still.
And finally, Katherine, in your interview with Toby Vale, she commented on the complexity of the struggle for equity in music. As she noted, it's not a linear path. There's a lot of ups and downs along the way. And from my perspective, it seems like there are a lot of things to be optimistic about right now, including the renewed focus on the contributions of Black women like Sister Rosetta Tharpe. You've been writing about music since the 1990s. Have you seen progress in the last few decades? Any reflections on that you'd like to share?
Yes, I do think progress has been made. That's why I chose to organize these chapters from oldest to youngest, because it seemed like a natural way as people read through the book for them to see what things have changed or not. Unfortunately, some things still seem to be a stubborn problem. But overall, I think we've made a lot of progress. I mean, there's some stories that some of the women at the beginning of the book, such as Susie Quattro and Ann Wilson of Heart and Gina Schock of the Go-Go's, talk about that would never be tolerated now. Incidents of being groped and things like that, where that just absolutely is completely unacceptable now. And so I think progress is being made. And I think when things do come up, women feel much more empowered to actually speak up about it and know that they're going to receive support. Because I think as the women who started off in the 70s and 80s pointed out, they noticed when things went wrong, but they didn't always speak up because they didn't feel like anybody would care or anyone would do anything about it. So I really think that we've become much better about helping women who have been in this kind of position of being taken advantage of or outright abused or even just disrespected. I think that people are much more likely to jump in now and say that's unacceptable. I think there always will be a certain contingent of people who will never come around. But I'm happy to say that I think that it's a very small minority of the population now and continues to shrink.
Katherine, your book, She's a Badass, is out everywhere now, bookstores, online, and you'll be here in Indianapolis on February 20th to discuss the book. The event will be hosted by the amazing bass player Nicole O'Neill of Wife Patrol. Any final thoughts you want to share on this event or anything before we go?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this event. I've never been to Indianapolis, so I think that's going to be really, really great. And I already am receiving such a warm welcome from everybody. And yes, I'm going to be in discussion with Nicole. We're also going to have Jody Galadriel Friend kicking off the event with a short musical set. There's going to be a VIP get-together at Tomorrow Bookstore first, and then later in the evening, the discussion with Nicole is going to happen at the Indy Fringe Theatre. So everything, all the details you can find on the Tomorrow Bookstore website, and they also have an Eventbrite event listing for it too.
Well, thank you so much, Katherine, for taking time to talk to us about your new book. I really enjoyed it, and I thank you for taking time to talk to us today.
No, thank you. And thanks for being a great ally. And kudos to your sister for setting you on the right path.
Thank you so much, Katherine. I've been speaking with the music journalist Katherine Yeske Taylor, the author of a new book titled She's a Badass: Women in Rock Shaping Feminism. That's all the time we have for this week. Check out the Cultural Manifesto podcast at WFYI.org or wherever you listen to podcasts. Cultural Manifesto is hosted and produced by me, Kyle Long. Thank you for listening.
WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington. With over 350 restaurants to choose from, Bloomington, Indiana is truly a food lover's paradise. Go to visitbloomington.com to discover what suits your taste.